So, good morning everyone. I'm Stefan and I'm here today with my good friend and colleague Henning. We are software developers, coaches and consultants from Workplace Solutions Ltd in Hamburg, Germany. We are engaged in the German-speaking and the European DDD community. I was told once that a good talk should focus on one idea. Our talk will be twice as good because we want to share two ideas with you today. The first idea is that we want to introduce you to domain storytelling. We hope that it becomes an additional modeling tool in your modeling toolbox. Domain stories show how people and software systems work together. And that brings us to the second idea, because if you view a process from the perspective of cooperative work, that, at least for us, has changed our view on context boundaries. Okay? So, what is domain storytelling? I think that we can all agree that it's essential to domain-driven design that we understand our domain experts. And Henning and I have been using domain storytelling for some years now to facilitate discussions with our domain experts. We would like to share that experience with you, and what better way to share is there than by telling a story.
Yeah, I'm the one to tell you the story. And yeah, since, as Stefan said, we're from Hamburg, and Hamburg is a port city, it's a story about seafaring. And how is seafaring? Okay. Thank you. So it's a story about seafaring. And what is seafaring today? Seafaring today is container shipping. And the story goes, this container is loaded onto this big container ship, the CMA-CGM Magellan, one of the biggest container ships in the world. And this happens in Shanghai, in China, and then the ship sails through half of the world, through the Indian Ocean, through the Suez Canal, the Mediterranean Sea, and then finally into the Northern Sea. And you probably don't know too much detail about European or German geography, so that's why I show you. We're here now. No, this doesn't work. We're here, USA, Colorado, and flying over Greenland and Iceland. You can come to Hamburg, which is located here. And if we zoom more into it, then we can see there's a problem. Hamburg is a port city, a seaport city, but it is not located by the sea, which is kind of strange. So you have to travel up this river, the River Elbe, to come into the port. And when we look onto the port from above, we can see, when we compare this to the open sea, it's narrow. And also, compared to the open sea, it's shallow. And that's a problem because that's quite the opposite of a container ship. A container ship is wide and a container ship is deep, of course. And there's another issue. There's a lot of traffic going on the river because it is so narrow. And so we have to bring ships in and bring ships out at the same time. And so the question arises, how is that supposed to work at all? And the first answer is, it doesn't. So the second answer is, yes, we can make it work. We try hard. We bring somehow the ships into the port. And we have a special authority in Hamburg that's working with this, the so-called Hamburg Port Authority, HPA, or HPA, as Nick would pronounce it. And this port authority has a couple of departments. One department you can see here, that's the so-called Nautical Center. And the Nautical Center is a bit like the tower at the airport. So it has a radar on top and a lot of windows there to look out on the river. And as the tower coordinates when planes can land and start, and where planes are located on the apron, which positions they get. And the same is true for this Nautical Center. They coordinate when can ships come into the harbor, when can ships go out of the harbor, and where do they come for a stop. And what they do in the Nautical Center before they tell the ships, take this route or take that route in real life and make the maneuver and carry the maneuver out in real life, to come into the port, go out of the port, is that they simulate these maneuvers. So that when in simulation a ship touches the ground, it's not as expensive as it would be if a ship in the real life would touch the ground and sink or whatever. And this simulation is traditionally done with this, big pieces of paper, so-called depth maps. So a depth map is a big map with some colorful thing in the middle. That's the stream of the river. And if we zoom in more closely, then we can see these colorful things. Those are numbers. So-called depths. Every number is a depth at a particular position. So at this position, we have 11.5 meters from the surface of the river to the ground of the river. So meters, because in Europe we use the metric system. And you can see another detail. There are these lines. Oh, sorry. These lines, you can see them here and here. Those are so-called contour lines. They are at 4 meters every step. So you can see here somewhere the seaside comes. There it gets shallower. Okay, where do these depths come from? Of course, we need an infrastructure to get them onto the paper. And this infrastructure consists of these ships, these special ships, so-called sounding ships. They have an echo sounder on board, and they sail every day through the harbor, through a part of the harbor, every day a different part, and sound the depth. They measure the depth with the echo sounder. And there's another ship on this picture. This is the one that comes when the depth that is sounded is not deep enough anymore. Then
it's an excavator.
It's an excavator, yeah. Exactly. And so this sounding ship travels through the harbor, measures the depths, and when they're done in the evening, then they send this depth into another department of the Port Authority in the so-called cartography. And the cartography takes these depths into their computer. They calculate minimum depth because the depth we get, they are very detailed, and we don't want all this detail in the depth map. And they calculate these contour numbers, and then they draw these depth maps, or print out these depth maps, put them into the mail, and send them over to the Nautical Center, which is located on the other side of the river. And in the Nautical Center, they take these depth maps and use them for this simulation. And how does this simulation happen? We have this depth map, and then we take out a ship silhouette, or the nautical officers take out a ship silhouette. It's a piece of cardboard that has the same size as the ship that's outside in the river mouth.
It's true to scale.
Yeah, that's one important detail. That has the same scale as the depth map. It's always a good idea. So what do we now do with this depth map, or what the nautical officers do with this depth map and the silhouette, is that they move the ship silhouette around on the depth map to find the route. And it sounds kind of silly, but it's actually working quite well. So they did this for a long time. But of course, we're software developers, we're computer guys, and the question we think of is, isn't there an app for it? Yes, and since 2 years there is an app for it, and I was lucky. I was in the team that developed this app. And I've brought you a picture here where you can see the old solution up there and the new solution down here. And you can see this is a depth map on paper. Here we have a digital depth map. And here we have these ship silhouette. in this small box for the ship silhouettes, for the ships that already have been there, and the magnifying glass and stuff. And down here, you can also see the tools. They are also in the application. So here's a ruler, and there's a ruler, and there are ship silhouettes, and here's also a ship silhouette. And on this video, you can see the nautical officers still can move their silhouettes around on the depth map to find the route.
Okay. So the reason why Henning was able to tell you the story is because some years ago, the domain experts told us this story. We didn't use pictures and PowerPoint. Back then, we used domain storytelling, and this is how we did it. So imagine you're with us in the Nautical Center. I'm a software developer. I want to develop this maneuver simulation software, and I know nothing about this domain yet. So I invited a couple of domain experts. So please welcome with me here on stage, Henning, the nautical officer.
Ahoy.
Nautical officers often used to work as captains at sea. That's why Henning is allowed to wear the captain's hat. And also here with me today is Henning, the cartographer.
Oh, good morning. The cartographer with a map.
And behind us here is a nice big whiteboard, and I will use these sticky notes to record what Henning and Henning are going to teach me about maneuver simulation. Okay. So, Henning, the navigating officer, how do you know that you have to simulate a maneuver?
Okay, yeah. As a navigating officer, I work at the Nautical Center. I work at the Nautical Center, and usually when a ship comes into the river mouth, the captain of the ship calls me on the radio and asks me for a route he can take to bring his ship into the harbor.
Okay, so we need a captain, and you said the captain asks you for a route.
That's right.
Okay, so what do you do then?
Then I take out a depth map, and I take out a ship silhouette and put it onto the depth map.
Okay, I'm not sure if I understand that. So you put a ship silhouette on a depth map, but what's a ship silhouette and where does this depth map come from?
Okay, and that's the point where I, the cartographer, may answer, because I'm the one who builds this depth map.
Okay, so how do you do that?
Okay, maybe I have to step a bit back and start a bit earlier. We have so-called sounding ships that travel through the harbor, and they measure the depth with their echo sounders.
Okay, so we need some more space here. I will move part of the story aside, refactor it, and you said we need a ship, a sounding ship, right?
That's right.
That measures depth. Okay, so they measure the depth. What's happening next?
After they measure the depth, they then send the depth in a raw form to me.
Okay, so they send a raw depth to you, and since it's raw, I assume you do something with it?
Yeah, that's right. I take this raw depth and calculate minimum depth of it because I don't want too much detail in my depth map, and also
Okay.
I calculate so-called contour lines.
Okay, so you do some calculations, calculate contour lines and minimum depths.
That's right. And then I take these contours and this minimum depth and draw them onto the depth map.
Okay, so draw it on a depth map.
Yeah, and then finally I take this depth map, roll it together, and put it into the post, and then send it to the Nautic Center.
Okay, so it's actually printed out on paper and sent to a mail.
That's right.
Okay, it seems like a lot of work. So how often do you update the map? Like once a week or once a month?
No, this is done on a daily basis. The sounding
Really?
ship, they send me the depth, the raw depth, every day in the evening, and first thing I do in the morning is that I create a new depth map and then put it into the post.
Okay, so all of this here is done on a daily basis?
That's right, from Monday to Friday.
Okay, so I will note that down here, it's done daily. Okay, and then, Henning, navigating officer, then you're ready to accept the call from the captain?
Yeah, that's right. Then the call from the captain arrives me, and
Okay.
I take out my depth map, I take out my ship silhouette and put it onto the depth map.
Okay, now I understand now what the depth map is, but this ship silhouette, okay, where does that come from?
The ship silhouette I take from a small box, which is there for the ships that already have arrived in the port. Sometimes when a ship comes for the first time, then I take out a piece of cardboard and a pair of scissors and then cut it out from the part.
Okay, so but
from the cardboard.
Since I'm trying to understand this on a big picture kind of level, can we skip this cutting of the cardboard and assume there's already a fitting silhouette available?
Yeah, usually the ships have been there already, so.
Good, but still I will make a note of that. So a fitting silhouette is available, so you put it on the depth map, and what do you do then?
Then I move it around and turn it on the depth map to find the route.
Okay, so you move and turn it to find the route, and once you found the route, you?
Then I call the captain on the radio and tell him this route on the radio.
Okay, and then the captain has the route, knows where to go. Is that it?
There's a lot of more details in it, but as you said, you only want to have a raw picture, and that's more or less it. Yeah.
Okay, great. So even though this is a very coarse-grained overview, we're already getting familiar with some roles and actors in this domain, and with some important activities and information that we work with, like there's a ship silhouette, a depth map, routes. So it's all it's a good source to build up our vocabulary. Okay, now you've seen a glimpse of how domain storytelling looks like. I want to take a couple of minutes to explain to you the idea behind it. So as you saw, these domain stories, they're not written down as text. We use a pictographic language to visualize them. And that language consists of two types of icons. We have actors, and we have work objects. We also have one type of arrow for depicting activities, and we use a couple of textual annotations. And we label the icons to express concrete meaning. And actually, we want to distinguish different kinds of actors. So typically, we have a person or a group of people or systems, or in the maneuver planning example, we had even a ship as an actor. It travels around, it does things, it measures depths, and so on. We also distinguish different icons for work objects. In our example, we can talk about the same route, about the same concept, but one time it's a verbal addressed on the radio, and then another time it's something that's written down on a piece of paper. So it changes representation during the course of our story. Now with that vocabulary, we can build sentences, and the idea is that the pictographic sentence reads almost like a sentence written in text. To tell stories, of course, we need more than just one sentence. So what we do is we append sentences and label them with numbers to bring them into a sequence. And the core idea behind that is to learn, to crunch domain knowledge. It's better to learn from a couple of good examples rather than diving into premature and therefore bad abstractions. Okay? So typically, when we look at a process like maneuver planning, we start with the happy path and maybe 2 or 3 important variations, and then a couple of very severe or significant error scenarios. So in our experience, even for complex processes, maybe 3, 4, 5 stories are enough to capture even complex processes. Okay. Henning?
Yeah. So far we used domain storytelling only for knowledge crunching, to find out about our domain, to learn about our domain. But we also can use it for other parts of DDD. So when we look on these 3 pillars of DDD, strategic design, ubiquitous language, tactical design, it can help us for all of them. So when we look at the story again, I think it's obvious that we can see there are a lot of words from the domain language which later will form our ubiquitous language. All these words we have here will probably be in our source code in the end. So we will have ship silhouettes and routes and find and all this stuff. And this can also help us for tactical design, because all the work objects we can see here, they're candidates to become entities or aggregates in our model. So we probably will have a class that's an entity ship silhouette if we are object-oriented. And maybe even more interesting, the activities, they are candidates to become operations of these entities. So they become commands or methods. Methods when we're object-oriented. So there may be a class ship silhouette with two methods, move and turn, for example, in the end. Okay, there's much more to say about this, but we don't have a lot of time today, so we will focus, we will focus not on ubiquitous language and tactical design, but on strategic design for today. And what we will show you is a heuristic you can see with domain stories. And if you're interested, Nick will directly after this talk show some more heuristics for it. Okay, but first let's go to our heuristic.
Okay, so that's the second idea that we want to talk about. In DDD, we said the model should reflect the domain. So to show this heuristic, we want to go back to where we started and look at our domain experts and their activities, okay? So for us, activities shape bounded contexts. What does that mean? So let's revisit some of the navigating officer's activities, okay? So we have a navigating officer that moves and turns ship silhouettes. And the navigating officer discusses routes with a captain. Somehow it seems like these things are kind of related. They all are related to maneuver simulation. But the navigating officer is also involved in other activities. For example, he or she receives a depth map. But it doesn't seem so closely related to the ship simulation, okay? So what belongs together and doesn't belong together, that's not our call to make as developers or as domain modelers. It's the domain experts' call to tell us what belongs together or not. And we think that domain storytelling is a great way to do that. So I said activities shape bounded contexts, but to be more precise, I should have said activities that belong together somehow. They shape bounded contexts. And as I said, what belongs together? Well, that depends on the domain expert's perspective. So I'll try to explain that again with our example. So I think even in the layout here, we can see a hint what belongs together and what doesn't. And if we were to ask the navigating officer, he would tell us that, well, this group of activities that I can see here, that's all maneuver simulation, okay? So that's kind of a good first idea for a possible candidate for a bounded context. Whereas for the navigating officer, these activities here, they're something else. And by looking at the story, we cannot really tell exactly what possible boundaries we find here. So we barely touched the day-to-day activities of the cartographers or of the people who work at the sounding ship. So we have not enough domain knowledge yet to have an idea whether cartography is maybe a separate bounded context and sounding, or maybe it's the same thing. But we have, I think, a group of activities that clearly kind of is clearly distinguishable from these others. And that's how we start to think about context boundaries, even when we are early on and still trying to learn about the domain.
Yeah. One more thing I find interesting that you can see here is that bounded contexts, they consist of activities, and the actors, they're not part of the bounded context. And I think that's quite true, because a bounded context is a piece of software. And the actors, what are here actors, they are users of the bounded context. So when we think about problem space and solution space, a user may be a part of a subdomain, but not of a bounded context, because a bounded context is something we build as solution for for a domain, a subdomain, for example. Okay.
Good. So, having worked with domain storytelling for several years, and then doing more and more domain-driven design, we realized at some point that for us, how we perceive bounded context, well, that's the activities that from an actor's perspective belong together. So that's like our go-to heuristic. But as Henning said, there are many other heuristics. So again, this is just one additional tool in your modeling toolbed. And yeah, those were the two ideas that we wanted to share with you today.
Yeah, okay. And coming to an end, after sharing these two ideas, as we said, there's, of course, a couple of more things that you can do with domain storytelling. We didn't have the time to talk about. But yeah, the good thing is that we're writing a book about it. I'm not so sure that's a good thing. But Stefan officially announced it on Twitter, so it has to happen.
If you say something on Twitter, then you have to do it.
Yeah. Yeah, talking about advertisement, we brought great stickers with us, so come after us if you like them for domain storytelling. Okay, and I forgot what I wanted to tell on this slide.
Well, I guess
I have to come up here. Yeah, okay. Yeah, what I wanted to tell you is that we hope that you like the ideas of domain storytelling and that you like to experiment with it, to try it out in your project, see how it can help you find context boundaries, find ubiquitous language, form domain models. And yeah, we would love to hear about it. So if you do it and you like it, please tell us your story. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, and now we have time for questions, if there are any.
Do we have a mic, James?
No, because we are, yeah, but
we have to
we'll
repeat it.
that.
Yeah.
Can you tell us some other examples of where you've been able to identify bounded context based on this kind of approach? Because I'm very intrigued by that, and I like the example you gave, but are there other ones from maybe other domains or from that same domain of how it's helped you do that?
Yeah. For example, yesterday in our I repeat the question. Paul was asking, are there other examples for finding context boundaries with domain stories? And I can tell about one example we showed yesterday in our hands-on session. There we use the cinema domain, and maybe, no, we don't have a picture of that. But there it also works. So what do we do in the cinema domain? We see what is happening when you go to the movies, watch a movie. And also there you can do a big picture or coarse-grained domain story. And what you can see there is, for example, the cinema goer goes to the box office, buys a ticket, then goes to the popcorn guys and buys some snacks. And then he enters the cinema room and shows his ticket to the usher. And then the film is finally shown. And yeah, all of these steps, I said, they are all kind of bounded contexts. So, and what's interesting in this example is that you can see the same work objects, the same things from the real life. They come again and again, and you do different things with them in different bounded contexts. So that means we will have different models in it. So for example, the ticket, we will buy it in a context maybe called box office or ticketing or buying. That's one thing we do, one activity we do with a ticket that will become one bounded context, one model. And another thing is that we show this ticket to the usher, and the usher controls this ticket. And I think it's a good idea to draw a context boundary between these two things, between the ticket selling on the one hand as one bounded context, and the ticket control as another bounded context.
Yeah, so in this example, we develop software for the cinema, and if you want to have an electronic ticket, for example, you might want to separate the purchase from the validation of the ticket, something like that. Yeah. Or maybe I can add another example, well, from this domain, from the shipping domain. So what's quite interesting is that, of course, this is overly simplified. So in this area here, we're talking about depth, okay? These people that work here talk about a normalized depth. But the Elbe River, even though it's a river, but it's so close to the sea that it is high tide and low tide. So the people here, for them, the depth is not normalized, it's time dependent, because the ships have to be in the port at a certain point in time. So they have to do some calculations on top. And so this difference in language, that's something that becomes visible in domain service very easily, and that's becomes a lot easier to talk about it.
Yeah. And I have another example.
But maybe we should ask also for another question.
Yeah. That's right. Okay.
Yeah. Keep going on my question.
Yeah. Okay, I show a quick other example. I think we have plenty of time. So, Herbst Campus. And that's from the domain leasing.
The leasing expert.
The leasing expert. There's a lot of slides. And there we go. So, oh, sorry. There we go. So what is leasing? Yeah, maybe I click through this. So what's leasing? The customer, Bob, here, he wants to reduce his carbon footprint, and so he says, I don't want to use my old car anymore, I want a new electric car, but I don't have any money. So what do I do? And then he goes to a car purchase company, and they tell him, that's no problem, we buy the car for you and then rent it to you for a monthly rate. So the customer tells his wish for a car to the salesperson, and then the salesperson calculates the installment, that's the monthly rate, for a contract, and then the customer signs this contract, and then the salesperson passes on the contract to a risk manager, because the customer signed the contract, but he can't get the car yet, because the sales person can decide it before the risk manager has first checked the credit rating of the customer and then calculated the resale value of the car. And if he has done this, then he votes the contract. So he says, yeah, the risk is low enough, or no, the risk is too high. And then, in the end, the salesperson gives the key or the car to the customer. And what we can see here is a contract that's, of course, central for leasing. The leasing contract happens to appear a lot of times in this story. And a lot of different things are done with it. There are a lot of different activities. And as you can see, this calculation of installment and this signing of the contract, that's maybe something different than this voting the contract and checking the rating. So there's probably something like a sales context up here and risk management context down there. And maybe there's also a calculation context up there. That's something to look into more closely.
Okay, now your question.
Yeah. So what's the next step now that you have these high-level contexts with fuzzy boundaries? Is the next step to clearly define those boundaries, or actually run down into action and continue on the storytelling?
Okay, so what's the next step after you have this overview, if you want to explore the context boundaries even further?
What's the right way to go about it?
Yeah.
Do you actually continue on expanding the storytelling, or
Yeah.
actually first clearly define
Okay.
So the question is, what's the right way to do? And as Stefan said earlier, we're consultants, and so you know our answer to every question. It's of course, it depends. And that's true here also. So we don't have the one solution to give you and say, no, just do it with this recipe and you will find the perfect solution. So it depends on your project what to do. But a typical thing to do is start with this big picture thing with a lot of people from different departments, from different business activities to get a big picture, and then drill down with these first maybe fuzzy context boundaries. Because then you don't have to do it with all these people that they're drilling down, going much into detail, which may be too much for them.
I don't know anything about storytelling. So are the actions the right point to drill down next to expand on the story, or is there any other?
Typically, yes. So I would say.
Please repeat the question.
Okay. So thank you. So are the activities the point where you would drill down to go deeper? And I would say yes, that's a good idea. So for example, we can take a closer look at this step here, this activity, calculate installment for a contract. Okay. So maybe we would do a couple of domain stories for how this works. And maybe there are different cases that we have to cover. So that's typically how I would proceed. Yeah. But about finding context, you will definitely need more than just domain storytelling to find good context boundaries. It's, I think, one of the hardest things to do in domain-driven design, and actually you can get all the help, you need all help you can get and all the tools and heuristics you can get. So it's just one idea, but it will not do the trick for you alone. Okay. Yes, please.
To follow up here with contract. What are some indicators that tell you, I guess, which bounded context should own contracts because they're being moved across context? Where does it live, or where does it naturally, I guess, originate?
The interesting
Repeat the
thing,
question.
Yeah, thank you. Sorry. The question was, where does the contract actually live? That was one question, and where is its origin? And the first question, where does it live, in which bounded context does it live? That's an interesting one because I think it lives probably in every context we will have in the leasing, because it's so central to leasing that most actions, most activities we do in leasing will happen to the contract. And that's exactly this point with the multiple models for DED. That's the strength, actually, of bounded context, that we don't have this one big class leasing contract where we have hundreds and thousands of lines in it, but we say, no, let's split this class into several classes, which have different bounded contexts, clear boundaries between them. We have one class contract in risk management, and we have one class with the same name, contract, in the bounded context, sales. And yes, there is a relationship between them, but not on a compiler level. So this bounded context will be built by one team, and then they can compile it and maybe even deploy it when they want. And this team, this bounded context, can do it in another rhythm. So that's actually, I think, the very strength of the bounded context idea. And the second thing, where does it come from? In this case, I think it always comes from sales, because that's where, thank you, that's where a contract is created for the first time. So the salesperson, he or she creates the contract and then probably puts a contract number on it, which will be the identity of the contract through all the other bounded contexts as well. This is the case here. There are other cases where you can have more than one context where an entity or an aggregate can come from, and where the origin can be.
Okay. When you start the storytelling, who do you need in the room? Do you need to have all the actors represented, or can you start doing the storytelling with one person and realize, oh, there's more to it, I need to go find the cartographer now?
Okay, the question is, when you start the storytelling, who are the persons to be in the room?
ideally, every actor is represented because we want to know we want to get the knowledge straight from the source. Yeah? So it's typically, especially in the beginning, that we have people from several departments, and often this is a great way of the people to connect and talk about something, because in day-to-day life, department boundaries are often very strong. Of course, it can always happen that you discover that, okay, we have someone who is not represented in the room. It's always good to later get to that person and retell the story like, okay, that's what I understood. Does that work for you, or is something wrong here? And if you go deeper, we'll probably need less people, or maybe just people from one department, like from sales. But even there, it's good to talk to more than just one salesperson, so you can get an understanding of what is an individual preference and what is like a general way how the people work.
And in real life, of course, it happens all the time that at least one important person is missing.
Yeah.
So that's what's happening.
So comments and then a related question. When you're in a room, the differences that I see, let's say, between the event storming and the main storytelling is, I would say, like this approach is kind of more compact. You basically feed it more on the whiteboard, or a series of whiteboards when you go through the scenarios, while event storming is basically like one giant timeline where you actually try to group everything together. Now, when you're in the room and you discover, okay, I'm just hypothesizing, that you have 4 whiteboards and you captured only 4 scenarios, but you found out that as you spoke that there are 5 extra. What are you going to do?
Yes.
Would you basically say, okay, we'll put these 5 additional scenarios on the list, and we'll talk them as soon as we capture the information from here, wipe it out, and then talk about these 5 additional scenarios? It would be the approach that you'll take. I'm just talking about not only from the conceptual perspective, but also like when you're in the room with the main experts and you work with them.
Okay, so 2 parts. Like the first part of the question was, what's the relationship to event storming, especially the differences in the layout of the visualization? And the other question is, what do you do if you run out of modeling space, basically? Is that the kind of phrase it like that?
Right.
Okay, I will answer the second question first, and maybe then you can put up the
I will answer the first question,
Okay,
yeah.
good.
So start with the second.
So the different ways to deal with it, like you can take pictures of the whiteboard and then take it down and start modeling again. You can. There's more than one tool for visualizing the main story. So often, especially when it's more like smaller groups or more like informal, we use sticky notes. Yes, Henning likes to use tablets. He's better at drawing than I am. Tablets or slightly better, or smartboards. You can use that. And there are also modeling tools. So you can use like general purpose modeling tools. They will not make you very happy, but actually there's now a dedicated modeling tool for domain storytelling. You'll find a link on GitHub, a link to GitHub on the domain storytelling webpage. That's my new favorite tool. So I hope that gives you some guidance.
And it's great because it's written in JavaScript and running in the browser.
And open source. I'm not sure if it's great because it's JavaScript, but it runs in the browser.
That's the great thing about it.
Okay, so we have one more minute, or we're within the last minute. So
please switch back to the other slide deck.
Which you closed.
Oh, sorry. So the question is, how does it relate to event storming? And of course, we anticipated this question, and that's why we're looking for the slides. There we go. So the question is, what's the relationship between domain storytelling and event storming? Is the relationship like this? So the truth is, no, it's not. So I think I can speak for the both of us. We both love event storming. It's a great tool, and domain storytelling is also a great tool, and they were developed independently of each other. Actually, domain storytelling is quite older, but it was invented at the University of Hamburg, so only a few people knew about it, and it had a strange German, very academic name. It used to be called exemplarische Geschäftsprozessmodellierung. And that's one word. That's German. So, but the ideas behind it, they are good, and so Stefan came up with a better name for it, with this domain storytelling, and that's why we now running around, traveling around with the ideas so other people could use them. And both tools are great, and what we think it's a good idea to have more than one tool in your toolbox, in your tool belt, because often there are situations where one tool is great and other situations where it just doesn't work. You don't know why, and then it's good to not only have a hammer, but also to then try a screwdriver and see if this is the right tool to use there. And so what we think, it's more like this. They're both great, and first world problems, I can't decide which to use here.
And actually we found good ways how to combine the two tools or methods, so you can ask us about that.
Yeah. For example, it can be interesting to start with a big picture event storming, to find the context boundaries, and then go into the smaller and detailed things with then domain storytelling, or the other way around. So it depends on what you do. So what's great in event storming is you can see the time and what's happening, the events, that can easily be seen. And domain stories, they are actor-centric, human-centric, so you can see who does what with whom. And also for documentation, a domain story is typically better suited than an event storm. So.
Okay, I think that's all the time we have.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.